YouTube video. I know this one's a little late. I wanted to apologize. I was sick this past week and fell behind on doing these narrative reviews, but this week, obviously I'm doing one, hopefully two, to try to get caught back up. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. But this week we're covering the next book in the Warstorm, or the next story within the Warstorm book. And each of these Age of Sigmar are like larger novels. There's 2 to 3 stories that are pretty fair length. Normally there's 2, and a few of them there's 3, but in this one, this is the second of 3. Yes, second of 3 in Warstorm, Storm of Blades. And this is the introduction to the character of Thostos Bladestorm and the Celestial Vindicators. And each of the different Stormcast hosts have kind of different personalities, right? Like, Sigmar put the people in each of these for specific reasons. So, for example, the Celestial Vindicators, all the people who are within that group, all the Stormcasts were whenever they were mortals, they had, everyone who's a Stormcast, whenever they were mortal, before they died, they basically prayed to Sigmar for different things. And Sigmar heard them and rescued them from whatever situation they were in. And, of course, with the reason being that he would turn them into his elite warriors, the Stormcasts. Well, those that became part of the Celestial Vindicators didn't pray for, like, salvation, didn't pray for safety, things like that. They instead prayed basically along the lines that Sigmar would give them the strength to avenge themselves and their fallen loved ones against chaos. And so you'll see that in not only this story, but in one of the next stories that I'll cover, maybe this week, maybe next week. I'm not entirely sure. It's one of the next ones chronologically, so we may cover that one next. That also deals with them. And actually, GW just released a free short story that it's not going to be free much longer, I think. That's the beginning of a series that they're doing that really focuses in on Thostos Bladestorm and his Celestial Vindicators, as we've already had with Vandus in the initial 2 stories of the Age of Sigmar with the Gates of Azir and the second one that I just covered. I'm drawing a blank on what it was. But anyways, the first 2 were of him, and then there's going to be another one. The next one with Thostos also focuses heavily on Vandus, and we had the series on Tarsus and his bull hearts. So we're really seeing the development of all these different named Lord Celestants, and kind of following their paths throughout the narrative thus far. But anyways, this is Thostos' turn, and so we begin this story in somewhat unique way compared to the other Age of Sigmar stories that we've had. In each of them, we've had the different Lord Celestants, or other larger characters like Lord Castellants, which there is a difference. If you're not familiar with it, real quick, Castellants are basically the defenders. So, in other words, Sigmar trains them to think defensively and to be more concerned with holding the territories that the Stormcasts gain, or be more concerned with almost that military police kind of role of protecting the soldiers whenever they're in camp or whatever, like more of that kind of defensive purpose, while the Lord Celestants are more of the hammer of Sigmar. They tend to be more offensively thinking. But throughout the stories, we've had each of these, more central characters kind of come to remember who they were, at least bits of who they were, prior to being a Stormcast. But normally this is as the narrative unfolds, and it's something that we see in the character, as the character develops over time. But in this story, with Thostos, we actually have this come as the beginning. The very beginning of the book kind of explains why he is seeking vengeance. And I think that that's an appropriate change from the norm, and I hope that it stays pretty unique to only Thostos, because of the fact that he and all of his Stormcasts are more focused on vengeance. And you'll see that throughout this story and the other ones, that does impact the way they fight. So if you're familiar with 40k, you see GW kind of recycling that concept of the different chapters in 40k, or the different storm hosts in this, kind of having that similar personality amongst all their troops. But anyways, we have Thostos Bladestorm introduced as Prince Chiron prior to his reforging as a Stormcast. And he was a prince in, I believe, the Realm of Beast. I'm not 100% sure on that. The name of the realm, I believe, is Amcash, which I had not heard before, and some of the description of it leads me to believe that, but I can't speak to that with 100% certainty. I should have researched it a little bit better, but I couldn't find anything, honestly, that told me. So I believe it's the Realm of Beasts, but I can't say 100%. And basically, he was called away from his village. It doesn't give real details why, but that is revealed later on in an additional story, so I'll save it until then, because it is important to that story, the reason, the specifics on why he's called away. But anyways, he's called away from his village to kill, and he comes back basically with the head of this chaos lord, not lord, but this chaos leader, this lower level leader, tribesman leader, that had been causing problems in some of these outer villages. And as he and his friend, Thom, are returning from this, this little foray, his friend Tom, it's Tom, not Thom, I'm sorry about that. Tom basically looks up and comments, "There's no birds. Everything's completely silent." And Chiron, who is Thostos, takes note of this and is like, "That's strange." And then he notices that where their village is, there's basically smoke rising, and he's like, "Oh no, they've attacked while we were away." And so he basically goes charging off towards them, and his friend is calling after him, but of course he's a bit headstrong of a youth and doesn't listen. And so he goes charging off, and he comes across this small pack of beastmen and chaos warriors and charges into them on his horse and just screaming out, "Vengeance, vengeance, vengeance," as he charges in. And he's actually able to just, cut most of these guys down. Finally, one of them is able to skewer his horse, and he falls, but he keeps fighting, and he's basically beat them all when a beast lord shows up, and Tom comes in and helps him, and basically it's knocked down by the beast lord, and looks like he's going to be killed whenever Chiron steps in and kills him, and then the rest of these chaos forces, this very large group, comes in that there's no chance of these two surviving the fight against them. And so he prays to Sigmar that he would be able to avenge himself and his people. And then Sigmar's lightning comes down and strikes him, and he's gone. And then we see him for the first time as the Celestial Vindicator next time that he's in the story. But then the story transitions to the Realm of Metal, and we meet Efrix, the 9th disciple of the 9th Tower. And of all the kind of Lords of Chaos, or, Chaos chieftains, or anyone of a significant kind of command position for Chaos that we've encountered in the stories thus far, Efrix, that is a mortal of Chaos, Efrix is by far the most interesting to me. He is he was a resident of the Realm of Metal, who swore allegiance to Tzeentch in exchange for power, and helped to conquer the realm. And in the next story that concerns Thostos, Vandus, and Efrix, we'll learn more of the details on that. So again, I'm not going to spoil more of the specifics, but it's enough to really know that he's basically a traitor to his people. And he's the 9th disciple of the 9th Tower because basically he serves directly under Kairos Fateweaver, who shows up in this scene to talk with him. And Kairos kind of hints to more for the audience than Efrix, of course, because Efrix already knows this, that Efrix is the 9th disciple who's had the 9th Tower to basically attempt this plan. And Kairos has basically dispatched of the other 8 over time, and I don't believe they're from the same realm, because the events that come up to basically the Realm of Metal falling to Chaos would indicate that these other disciples are from other places, and that Kairos has basically found them unworthy at times, and so some of them he's dispatched. So he's basically making the point that Efrix, you're nothing special. Mind your place. Because Efrix, of course, being number one, a mortal of chaos, and number two, a servant of chaos, has an ego, right? Like every chaos superior officer that we meet in any of these stories has a massive ego, and they're focused on how great they are and that they're going to prove it to their chaos god, and then of course achieve immortality through becoming a chaos daemon. And he hates Kairos, and he basically wants to supplant Kairos because Kairos is always, picking at him and insulting him and all, and his ego can't take it anymore. He suffers it to Kairos's face, but of course behind Kairos's back he's muttering to himself, like, I'll show you kind of attitude. But anyways, he sees a vision of the Stormcast coming and into the realm of fire, and then he starts to see indications that they are coming to the realm of metal, and the storm comes, and he sees pure water, which hasn't been here in dozens, if not hundreds of years. And he sees the first lightning strikes, and the Stormcast begin to come down, and he realizes that that these Stormcasts are imbued by magical power of Sigmar. And Efrix has his tower, as he is the ninth disciple of the ninth tower, that he has slowly been imbuing with magical power because he wants to take the entire realm of metal and transmute it to Tzeentch's realm. Basically teleport his tower into Tzeentch's realm and the surrounding area. And he has devised these copper skulls that adorn his entire tower to basically absorb magic to allow this to be possible. And so he has a plan, because it's still, a ways from completion until he's gathered enough magic, that he's going to allow the Stormcast to come to him. And then whenever he's going to take their magic and use it to further his own goals. And then we cut away from him to Thostos and the Stormcast that have arrived, and they have come here to reach the Silverway, which is a realm gate that was held by the Duerden in times past, that basically is a very important location, because we don't know everything about the realm gates thus far. Like, we've gotten hints and details and all about how they work and some of their properties and all. We know that some of them have been corrupted by chaos and have basically been forced to where they only open to a certain place. We see that in another story that I will be covering probably in about a month to a month and a half, just because from a chronological perspective, as we go in order, we won't get to that one until then. But in that story, there's a realm gate within the realm of fire that has been basically permanently corrupted to only open into Khorne's realm, and so Khorne has some of his daemons like coming through there basically every day, and there are other ones that have been corrupted similarly in other places, but this one is specifically mentioned as a very key realm gate because it is one that basically you can journey to any of their other realms and just about anywhere from. So apparently that's unique because they're making a big point of it. By this point, the Stormcast have already established their beachhead in the realm of fire, in the realm of Akshi, I believe it is, that is described in the initial book, The Gates of Azir. So they've already got one, but for some reason this one is unique, and we're not entirely sure why. In addition, they have come to seek out the Duerden to basically unite them, as I've mentioned before in some of the other videos, to unite them and the other residents of the different realms together with their own forces to drive back chaos. And they discover where the Dwarven capital was, but it's empty. And this place is incredibly well hidden, and basically they come to the conclusion the reason chaos hasn't found the Silverway is that the dwarves had specifically hidden it in such a way that only an ally of, I believe it's Bruni, is their god now, could find it. And so they do find it, but in finding it they lead chaos to it, and that's a recurring theme that we're going to kind of see in some of these stories, is that in their search for things that the Stormcast are going to inadvertently, by discovering things that were lost or were hidden, lead Chaos to it and have to basically fight Chaos for control of these various points. And so Efrix leads a small force against the Stormcast. And when I say small, I mean it's significant, you know, that not knowing the true power of the Stormcasts, it's at least good enough to give them a fight. And perhaps, you know, the generals of the area had thought that this would be enough. But really the point of it, Efrix is just probing. It's more of a probing attack to truly find where their strength, what their strength is, and of course to, you know, kind of encourage them to press on and with some urgency towards his tower. So he leads this force there and uses his Tzeentch powers and kind of boosts his forces. And there's a fairly dramatic fight. Like there's points in it which you kind of wonder, like, how are the Stormcast going to get through this? But eventually they find a way and they do defeat this smaller force that Efrix has led. And so he retreats back to his tower. And whenever, excuse me, so then eventually the Stormcast continue and they move on to the fortress and they're assaulting the fortress, which is exactly as Efrix has planned. And he has some of these other lords that, you know, kind of like sided with him and Tzeentch, of course, whenever they were conquering the realm. And so they basically have their own subsections of this city and the surrounding area that they rule over as lords. And he has one with him and his Chaos Warriors, and they're letting the Stormcast come. And you know, it's a pretty big fight that's happening, and the Stormcast, you know, are doing pretty well, and they're attacking the fortress, and but you know, it's not easy going. Like, this is a fortress that has been well prepared. It's very much imbued with magic. As Stormcast die, their spirits are not able to escape the skulls that absorb magic, are basically absorbing the magic of their souls into it, so they're unable to get away. And so the Stormcast begin to attack the walls directly, as opposed to trying to attack the defenders of this fortress so much. And Sigmar himself actually lends aid and starts basically sending down lightning and striking the walls to help free them. And they start targeting all of the skulls and they start blowing them open. And this, you know, this is working, and the souls are being released back to Azir, and the Stormcast are beginning to win. And then Efrix shows up and basically summons the defenses of this tower that he had set in place for just a moment like this. And these silver blades that are, like, you know, basically wielded by ghosts. Like, you can't see anything. The blades are actually, like, by themselves, just, you know, fighting by themselves, right? These unique blades come up, and they're able to literally slice through Sigmarite shields, which is a very significant thing. In all of these novels, we've really seen it stressed how strong Sigmarite is, right? Like, it's a metal that there's many times that, like, a warrior of Sigmar is, like, knocked over or whatever, and a Chaos Warrior will, like, come out with an axe, and it'll talk about how, like, his, you know, demon forged weapon is unable to penetrate the armor of Sigmar, right? And this is something that we see quite often. So it's significant that these blades can just so easily slice through the shields. And basically the Stormcast are caught off guard by this, and there's these hounds that are summoned by Efrix, and they attack as well, and they have teeth that are basically made of the same thing. And so the Stormcast begin to be driven back a little bit, but of course they rally, and as these new, you know, troops and the Chaos Warriors come out and attack, and they're able to beat them all back and break these skulls and free these, you know, the more of these Stormcasts, and they basically get closer and closer, and finally Efrix summons his greatest weapon that he has available to him in this, I believe it's a Mutalith or whatever, that they have a model of, that it has basically the ability to transform enemies, and it starts, like, zapping these Stormcasts and turning them into basically nothing, or like stone, or into, like, Chaos Spawn or whatever. And finally one of them strikes our hero, Thostos lost it for a second there, strikes him, and he begins to transform, and he's like, oh no, we can't fail. But then he prays to Sigmar. In this moment, he's like, I want to do what I was designed to do. I want to avenge myself and my fallen loved ones and you against these chaos. And Sigmar hears his prayer, and the transforming energies, instead of doing what they're supposed to do, because these are chaotic in nature, instead it begins to transform Thostos himself, not the armor that he's wearing, but himself, into pure Sigmarite. And he realizes this and kind of laughs and begins to advance forward on Efrix and this beast, and he's able to lead some of the other troops, and he literally cuts down the beast and is basically beating Efrix back, and then basically Efrix has to teleport the fortress away, and there's like this explosion, and everything kind of comes to an end, and then Thostos is like in darkness, and is dead, and one kind of is wondering like what happens next. Like he of course kind of ceases to exist temporarily beyond his spirit, and then we end the book with him awakening again because he's been reforged, and he's on his knee kneeling, and he hears Sigmar say, "Arise, Thostos Bladestorm, we will kneel no more." Basically, there's not time for this. And then Thostos is kind of groggy and weary. He's like, "How am I here? How did I get to this chamber?" And I'm kneeling before Sigmar, and all these storm hosts are arrayed around me, and there's Vandus the Hammerhand standing beside me, and Sigmar is commissioning us for this great mission. And Thostos knows something is different about him, but he's not entirely sure what. So that's where we draw to the close with this one. The next story that continues with Thostos literally picks up right here. So we'll continue with it there. But until next time, this is James, and happy gaming.